Well, good morning. Welcome to episode 3 of Everyday Men, Profound Conversations. My name is Adam McConnell, and I'm joined with my friends and brothers, Jonathan Richardson, Brenton Ruger. Behind the scenes is Ken Emmer, who is really, truly holding up this project through IT support and so forth. We also have our guest this month, who is Bill Stanfield, who I'll introduce formally in a minute. This program aspires to serve the broader community by creating a connected and supportive container to facilitate engaging and often difficult conversations. We intend to create a safer, more peaceful world by confronting issues that touch some of our deepest wounds. My belief is that if we're going to heal our deepest wounds, both personal and societal, it starts with me and other courageous individuals who are willing to step up and support each other as we co-create a more equitable, just, empathetic, and compassionate future for us all. Each monthly episode, Everyday Men, Profound Conversations, enables us to highlight the work of an organization within our community that's trying to make the world a better place. And this week, I'm very excited to introduce Bill Stanfield of Metanoia. Metanoia is a community development corporation located in Chicora, Cherokee neighborhood of North Charleston. For the past 20 years or so, Metanoia has invested in neighborhood assets to build community leaders, to establish quality and affordable housing, and to generate economic development within his neighborhood. Everyday Men, Profound Conversations is sponsored by the Charleston community within the Greater Carolinas chapter of the Mankind Project. And the Mankind Project is a global nonprofit training and education organization with 3 decades of proven success hosting life-changing, experiential personal development programs for men. Mankind Project supports a global network of free, peer-facilitated men's group that supports men in leading lives of integrity, authenticity, and service. Thank you for that. And with that, I just want to again introduce my friend, colleague, Bill Stanfield, who I just want to say that you are a role model to me. And I'll be fully transparent. I work with Bill on certain projects, so I might be a little bit biased toward his perspective on things, but I deeply, deeply, deeply value the work that you do, both personally in our community. And I feel very blessed that I have the privilege to work with you. And so with that being said, I'm gonna allow you just to introduce yourself, who you are, and what your organization is at this time.
My name's Bill. I work for Metanoia, which I sort of helped start years ago. We were begun by a group of churches across the state of South Carolina, did a demographic study of the state, and I found that the neighborhood where I live and work had the highest concentration of child poverty in South Carolina. So they sort of helped my wife and I, gave us a little bit of money to come to North Charleston. They gave us a year to spend listening to the community before we did anything, which we value, very important, that listening. And what was sort of birthed out of that year and working with local residents in the community, it was Metanoia. And we now are kind of a holistic community development organization that does year-round youth leadership programming. We're a nonprofit housing developer and do some economic development projects as well. I think for this conversation, it's worth sort of noting, I'm also a father. I'm an associate minister at St. Matthew Baptist Church, where Metanoia's offices are housed, which is other than me, it's a Black Baptist church in the community that we serve. I try to be a follower of Jesus, but in a way that is inclusive of everybody around me, and try to sort of live in a very authentic way in the community that I serve alongside my family. I'm 2 boys. They're 15 and 11, soon to be 12. They're 9th grade and 6th grade, so that's my real job. I come to work to rest, as a matter of fact, and so that's a part of it as well. And so
that's great. Excellent. Bill, thank you for that introduction, Bill. My first question for you is really something I don't know about you, and I'm really interested, is how did you first fall into this work? Like, what drove you when you were a younger man to get into this work, from your perspective? I'm kind of curious of how you got here.
Yeah, let's see, there's lots of different starting places there, but like, I think that I grew up in Greensboro, North Carolina. I grew up in a community where like faith was very important to me. My faith was important to me. As I got older and went to college, at some point, I sort of felt led to perhaps go on to seminary, and was thinking more about being a pastor in a church somewhere along the line. And I went to Princeton Theological Seminary for graduate school. And I could have walked out of there and probably been a pastor of some big steeple church somewhere, and gotten lots of credit for my nuanced ideas. And that was really appealing to me when I started seminary, frankly. And then about halfway through seminary, I took a year off and worked in a ethnic ghetto in Brussels, Belgium, of Moroccans and Turks and that kind of thing. And those folks really didn't care about my highly nuanced ideas about God or theology or all these academic achievements. It just came down to like whether there was love there, whether I could sort of, a Christian word would be incarnate, in flesh, certain values apart from any other agendas. And at first it was very disorienting to me, but because I had sort of been on a certain kind of ladder, and but then it was very freeing to me. And I came back, I had a year left of graduate school, and I came back on a very different track, finding and sort of feeling led that whatever I did, I would want it to be, on the margin, so to speak, of society. Because I find that, and really about less about sort of having a set of ideas and living in the top 3 inches of my head, but really about embodying values in a way that was less about ideas and more about embodying. And so I came back to seminary for my final year, happened to have the good privilege of meet my wife, who was also in graduate school there. She had started her year while I was away for a year, and we hit it off and had a similar sense of calling and way of thinking about the world. And so we got married, lived in Philadelphia for about a year. I was a chaplain for a homeless and transitional housing organization, lived in sort of federally subsidized housing in inner city Philadelphia for a year, which is a real learning experience. And then came down here to start what would eventually become Metanoia. And so it's not, it is like the work that we do, what I'm real resistant to. People like to sort of like, I'm always sort of pushing back against the narrative that like wants to put me on some kind of pedestal, or as some kind of, God forbid, some kind of like great white hope in a largely African-American neighborhood, these kinds of things. Like it's about me, and it's about what is nourishing to me, and about the relationships that I'm able to form here. And those kinds of things are very renewing to me. And I find God in it. And so it's very sustaining to me.
Wow, good quote. Good answer. Good answer. Thank you for that. I have a question. Just thinking of the term, the word metanoia. I've read about it on your website, and just tell us a little bit of what it means and how it applies to your work and your walk, how you walk and how you work.
Yeah, that's a great question, Jonathan. That's a great question. Thank you for asking that. So metanoia is a Greek word. It comes from the New Testament, was written in Greek originally. And it means to make a positive change of direction, positive transformation of heart and mind. A with is sort of a meta in the sort of root words here. Meta means with, and noia means understanding. That's what I say. Paranoia is like a false understanding, but metanoia is like a change with a deep understanding of the consequences. And Jesus, Jesus' sort of fundamental idea of social change, he calls the kingdom of God. Martin Luther King later on called it the beloved community. It's just an idea of, a healed world. And he says the first step to that is a metanoia, like is to have and we Christians down through the years, we translated this word as repent, which is a lousy translation, because as a good Baptist, I think repent means feel guilty about something, right? And if you don't feel guilty about feeling guilty, you just got to feel guilty. That's the main thing, and so, but really the word means to look for something better and change to move towards that something better, but to realize that the change has to begin from the inside out. It's not like you can work for something better out here and not change anything in here and expect to get there. And so, it's interesting because we sort of like the word when and thankfully, our local community board resident board members when we first started Metanoia. It was kind of insane that we were bringing this Greek word, but they're like, yeah, that sounds kind of cool. Let's do it. But it's taken on more and more meaning over time, and it's really been, I'll say this, it's not, and I think as Jesus uses it, it's like a soul change leads to social change, and that's not just an agenda for the community where I live. That's an agenda for everybody. In other words, when we are doing fundraising on Kiwa Island, those folks' souls needs to change as much as a young person from my neighborhood who's oppressed by the forces in our society in order to get to a better society. Everybody's got to go through some kind of process of change and transformation. And we see that change and transformation not as, we want to see it not the social change and the soul change as unitive, not distinctive, that they ought to be, we ought to be thinking about both. It's both and not either or. So that answer your question? Get at it a little bit.
Yes, absolutely. I appreciate that. Thank you for that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, thank you for that. That's a great segue into this next question, Bill. So our title today is about soul change. I mean, that's the title. That's our title. And how soul change is connected to social change, which you just spoke of. Would you be willing to talk a little bit about the soul change or the transformation part of your journey?
Yeah, I mean, I think that for me, that's an everyday process. It comes more and more. I find it is about, it's less about some one moment or about some milepost as it is like attending to practices in my own life that help me show up. Right now, I don't know how many people are listening to this, but some folks are more present to it than others. That's just the way it works. Like when we're in a meeting at work or whatever, we're more or less present to that meeting anytime. And the question becomes, what practices in my life help me really show up so that I can experience sort of a sense of sacredness in my day, in each meeting that I might have, that I can find something, and by sacred, I mean sort of like God breathes through it somehow, that there's something special there. There's something that if it were taken away, I would wish it, I would recognize it more for the honor of it and the privilege of it. But we take it for granted because it's just day-to-day life, and so we fail to sort of see the beauty in it and the remarkableness of it. Just the fact that we're all sitting here and I just did that. I just inhaled. That's pretty damn special. Like a lot of people didn't get that privilege today. And so how do I like live on a daily basis like that? And I think that for a lot of us that start off trying to change the world, we're so focused on that change that we forget how many little gifts are given to us as the energy, as the well, the source for staying at that work. And we get frustrated because the world doesn't want to change always. And there are real reasons for the way things exist as they are. And there are real powers that are in place that keep things as they are. And so we get frustrated, we get pissed off, we get angry. And we get to a place where a lot of people about my age in their mid 40s or so that they're right about everything, but you don't want to go to dinner with them because they're just so angry and frustrated. And there's a lot to be angry and frustrated about. But how do we stay connected to something true in our lives, to our source, so that all that trouble that comes as we sort of push back, we still have a connection? And I think that's what you guys are trying to do, as far as I can tell, and as sort of what the best of spirituality, faith, can do for folks is keep them connected so that they can stay engaged and be different over the course of that, and then once that happens, then the struggles can actually be the ground out of which something new within us can be birthed, rather than just sort of something that is frustrating and awful, and so it can change sort of our sense of what we're going through.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that.
Thank you for that, Bill. That
Makes
really
a lot of sense.
Yeah, that really touched me, Bill. I think when you described the middle-aged, disgruntled, angry, guy at dinner, that sounds like me a lot of times. But one thing I think that I just want to share is that morning after we had that terrible fire, and we can describe that maybe after, but I remember looking at you and you looking at me, and I remember seeing in your face that there was no way that we were not going to continue to push forward. Like, and I came in with this sort of skepticism at first, but then I saw your, I guess we'll call it faith.
Delusion.
Yeah, well, we'll call it faith.
Resolve, delusion.
Yeah, I mean, but you were there and you were engaged, and it was like, I looked at you and I was like, I've never felt more inspired about getting a project done than after that moment, after, having a project that blew up after 5 years. And so I guess, and it was, and this kind of ties back to, you suggested listening to Richard Rohr's talk, and I love that. There's one part of his talk, and I can't remember which lecture it was. He talks about engaging the world with yes rather than no. Right? If you engage the world with every situation with yes, then you're open, and then at that point you can make judgments about whether or not you want to continue with it. But if you engage the world with a no, then all of a sudden you put up a block right away.
Yep.
And you can't be open to whatever the possibilities of that situation are.
Yeah.
And I feel like you're a person who engages the world with a yes. And how do we get a yes? And how do we make that change? And you know, is that true for you? And if so, how'd you get there?
Yeah, I think to the degree that is true. Thank you, Adam. So Adam, just briefly, Adam references a major project we've been doing at Metanoia to renovate the former Chicora Elementary School for education and art space for the community. And last year we were headed towards a closing for what would become like a $20 million project, and we got all the financing arranged. We're about to close, start construction. We had the building plans at the building department, permits ready to be picked up. And just 3 weeks or so before it was supposed to close, there was a colossal fire at the school. So it sort of has put the whole project, delayed it. We've been working through an insurance claim, all these kinds of things. And it would be easy to sort of, I got called at 2 o'clock in the morning from one of our community resident board members, and walked across the street and saw this fire going up in 100 feet in the air. And so I think to your question, Adam, like, I think it does go back to, you're going to probably hear me say this a lot this morning, like it goes back to having a practice in my life that connects me, you know, I think always the circumstances in our lives threaten to name us, you know, they threaten to, and we oftentimes give them that authority. You know, and by name us, I mean, like they threaten to name us either a success or a failure, either of which is very dangerous, by the way. Not one. That's what all spiritual traditions teach.
Like they define us.
Yeah, to define us. That's right. And so I think it's a matter of having, you know, living life connected to God in my language, Christ in my language, in a way that no matter what the circumstance is on a daily basis, it may be hard, it may be joyous, but it's not going to name me. It's not going to define me. And that once, like, we oftentimes, particularly I think maybe as men, we get taught to, you know, think of and clear, like it's either a win or it's a loss, or very linearly, like we got this goal, we have to get to it, we cross the finish line. Yeah. But like for me, it's a matter of trying to have people around me, a daily practice in my life that reminds me, like, it's not really about, you know, I hope, Adam, one day we're gonna like be at some kind of celebration when we get that school renovated, and I hope, you know, the goal is like, actually the goal for me is, can I get to a place where on the morning of the fire and on the day of the celebration, the same bill shows up, you know, because I recognize, like, the value is, there's this tremendous quote from Thomas Merton that I'll sort of paraphrase, where he says, like, you know, it's not about, don't depend on the hope of success, that it's sort of fleeting. And if we get hooked up on something, we begin to over-identify with it. And then we end up doing terrible things to other people because we did over-identify with it. But, you know, it's about the relationships. How do we create relationships? And how do we, you know, it's the value of the relationship. So, like, you know, honestly, Adam, on that day on the street after the fire had happened, that, you know, I was down too, for sure. But the event of that fire or the problem at that school didn't matter as much as the fact that you were there and other people that I can depend on were there. And, so we have those relationships. Let's see where they lead, and it's more of, it leads to more of an adventure than it's always a yes or no, yes or no, yes or no. And so just a couple of thoughts, I guess.
Yeah, that's beautiful.
Fantastic.
Thank you for sharing that.
Mm-hmm.
That's fantastic. So many questions. I've got so many questions for you. I've got like 4 or 5 here that I want to ask, but I think one of the big ones is you must really have a vision for where you're going, in my assessment. And within the Mankind Project, it's taught to have a mission of service can be of profound importance to a man, and it can serve a man. And so that ties in to this question. And I think I would imagine you have a vision. You can speak to that. But you're a white guy working in a Black community. And so how do you navigate doing that kind of work well without paternalism and potentially doing more harm than good?
Mm-hmm.
I would love if you're willing to speak to that.
Yeah.
And I just want to say, you said something so profound just a few minutes ago, and what I took from it was listening. You said something about listening to what I termed as listening to understand versus listening to fix or to diagnose,
Mm-hmm.
or something like that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And the difference between those, and I really see you as a profound listener. So just wanted to throw that in there too.
Yeah. Well, I think it's interesting that you put those 2 questions. Some might not see those as 2 questions, but actually it's really good you put them together. The question of like, what is your vision, and then how do you work in a neighborhood where you're a white guy in a largely African American community.
Yes.
And it's good you put them together, because it's sort of worthy of note that any white guy's vision within a largely African American community is invariably going to be a little colonial, and is invariably going to be a little is going to really have a liability to it, but by virtue of not being rooted in Black experience and not being rooted in the day-to-day life of people in the neighborhood. So I'm very leery, frankly, of I've gotten to a place where my vision, if you want to call it that, is a who am I on a day-to-day basis, rather than like some big picture. People have to oftentimes ask me when they come to visit Metanoia and they see the youth programs, houses going up, and large economic development projects, and we're incubating Black-owned businesses on Rose Avenue in our neighborhood, and they say, did you see this when we started Metanoia? And absolutely not. What we wanted to do is kind of follow a process and listen and learn. And so, if to the degree I have a vision, it's to be in authentic relationships with folks, to live an integral life where things are sort of integrated, and to be to serve. So it's important that to do this work well. It's important that I have a board of directors that's 75% Black, and that has many people from the neighborhood, that they're residents in our community that I'm accountable to.
Yes.
It's important to live in the neighborhood, from my experience, because it's been the best. I have good degrees from good institutions, but it's been the best education I've ever received, of what it, and I still don't understand everything, but it's been the best education I've ever received. And so for me, the vision comes down to, how do I on a daily basis, love. Maybe that's it. That's it. And embody that, and incarnate that. Like, how do you put it into flesh and blood, in a way that people can see it, and yet that for it to remain authentic. Because there's a lot of folks that I see, a lot of folks that look like me, that show up to communities like the one where I work, that have a vision that to them sounds very noble. But
And they're fairly attached to that vision. I would
very
imagine.
attached to it, yes.
Okay.
And ultimately, they can do a lot more harm than good, in the midst of that. And so, how do you sort of really listen and let the community drive a process, and be there as someone that's there to like help with that, with helping people reach their own goals rather than just defining the goals yourself along the way.
Okay. Thank you
Uh,
for that.
You know, I'm having a moment of vulnerability here because, you know, part of my question that I was going to ask, it's centered around trust. It's still part of my thought process. And I'm really glad that you, Brenton, brought up, you know, kind of jumped in front of me because, you know, when you're crossing demographic lines, racial lines, you know, trust is definitely something that is key, you know, and being a black-bodied man growing up in a community very similar to the one that you served, you know, there was no metanoia in, you know, my neighborhood, and that's okay. That's okay. That's not the point that I'm gonna dwell on. You know, trust is definitely a key factor in that, and I just would like to hear from you how that came about with the community that you serve, the immediate community. I know you've been there for a while, and you know, and I can kind of speculate that it's still an ongoing process to, you know, but how does that, how did that look when you first started? Just, you know, a little bit of history on that, because you said you've been there for 20 years, right? No, no, no,
Yeah.
no.
Yes, that's
Yeah,
correct. Yeah.
that's a long time. And, you know,
Yep.
personally, I want to commend you for that, you know, just from the stance that you take. You kind of remind me of the rich man who approached Jesus and he asked him, you know, what can I do? And what did he tell him? He's, you know, first you have to give up everything you own or something to that. I don't remember the exact thing.
You get
I'm,
there.
I'm,
Yep, that's right.
yeah, I kind of see that to a small degree in what you've done and where you are now, you know, making a difference, you know, and for me, that's big. So, you know, thank you for that.
Sure. Yeah.
But
Well, so the trust question is a good question, and it is true. You said sort of how did you establish trust, and it's true that it's a daily process, you know, and it's you know, it has to be earned, you know. So the things that we have done, I think, that have helped is first, the churches that hired us, they gave us a year to spend listening to folks. Nothing establishes trust like listening, you know, listening without agenda. And it was interesting in that first year, you know, people from the community, we would go and we would listen, and that's all we were there to do is listen. And they would talk, you know, we'd ask folks some questions, they would talk, and often, like about halfway through the conversation, they'd say, all right, now really, what are you here to do? As if to say, like, you know, white people don't show up here just to listen. Like, that's not the way this works. Like, we've been, you know, you grew up in a community job. I'm pretty much guaranteeing, well, there wasn't a Metanoia, there were white people that showed up to help. And, you know, that's just not how the white people don't come to listen. They come to diagnose, fix, and make themselves feel better, oftentimes, is what their agenda is. And
they showed up in my community as teachers and principals at the public schools.
Right.
Yeah.
And so I think that so listening has helped, you know, live in the neighborhood helps. Still today, when I meet somebody new from the community, I know that oftentimes I can sort of say, hey, you know, where you live? And they tell me what street they live in. I say, oh, I live on Success Street. And you can feel like a bit of a wall, you know, it's not as if the wall completely comes down, but there's a little bit of the wall comes down a little bit. It's like, oh, you live on Success Street? You know, like, it's like, oh, I know you don't fully get it, but you get it more than I thought you got it before you told me you lived on Success Street, you know? And so, you know, being associate minister at a Black church, you know, being, and showing up, maybe the most important thing is like showing up every day as a learner. So I know more than I did 20 years ago when we started this work, but I don't know enough, you know, and with regard to issues of race, and particularly, you know, I feel like I'm, you know, feel like oftentimes I might know a little more than many of my white brothers and sisters, but I still also feel like I'm like, there's a big ocean ahead and I'm about ankle deep in terms of my understanding. I've been doing this 20 years. I have a lot more work to do. And so continuing that work, and that work, again, is sort of, it's the beauty of it, that the internal work is the very thing that builds the trust externally, you know. And we really make a mistake when we think, oh, well, these are the three things I'm going to do to earn trust. And then it becomes the fault of the people that didn't trust me, that I did my 3 things and they didn't trust me. What was up with that, you know? And we blame them instead of taking on that responsibility on ourselves. And so I think just trying to, you know, focus on myself and recognize that, like, it's okay. You know, there's still people today that haven't, you know, in our community, I'm certain you can find folks that don't have, you know, will say something askance towards myself or towards Metanoia. And that's okay. Like, you know, many of their experiences may come from other places and other people, and they've sort of translated that onto me. And that's just part of it, you know, and it's recognizing that it's not sort of taking it personally, but recognizing that, that's part of it as well. And how do I kind of accept the difficulty and still try to feed back something better in the world along the way, you know? And yeah, it's an ongoing process, to be sure, but and my ears are a lot more helpful than my mouth is in that earning trust thing, for sure.
I like that.
Yeah, thank you for that. Thank you.
Bill, following up with that, I know you're talking a lot, but and that's why you're here. But you know, you spoke a little bit about, you know, white people coming into your neighborhood with certain charities and so forth, and sometimes doing more harm than good. Metanoia has taken a fairly unique approach to that, and I didn't know if you wanted to talk about that. I mean, you're in your TEDx talk, you know, that you described capital flows through neighborhoods very eloquently about how we treat people from neighborhoods that you grew up in versus people that Jonathan grew up in, and how the actual money itself influences the outcomes of those neighborhoods. I don't know if you could speak up what you're doing differently from that.
Yeah, I appreciate you actually mentioning that, because it does actually tie. I had meant to actually say something about it with Jonathan's question, because it has a lot to do with the trust question as well. So what Metanoia does most fundamentally is something called asset-based community development. And what that was pioneered by 2 sociologists at Northwestern University, John McKnight and Jody Kretzmann. They went around the country, studied 300 neighborhoods like mine, because every city's got neighborhoods like mine, unfortunately, where investments were pulled out. You know, there's trouble, there's just lots of issues going on. And what we used to do in nonprofit work or ministry work, whatever, we would come to communities like that and see a lot of problems and say, well, let's identify the key needs and start filling these needs, and things will get better. And that sounds on the face of it like a pretty good idea, but these guys looked at these 300 neighborhoods and the aggregate indicators of success in these communities in terms of crime, educational attainment, that kind of thing, and the number of needs providers in the neighborhoods, the number of people with the best of intentions that were identifying needs, problems, deficiencies, trying to fill them. And they found there was either no correlation between the number of needs providers or a negative correlation between the number of needs providers and the overall success of neighborhoods. And wait a minute, what's going on? Why is it that sometimes it seems like the more people there to help, actually the worse things are getting, rather than the better things are getting? And what they realized is that, like, you know, when we get the solution, we get solutions to the problems we're facing largely by virtue of the questions we ask at the beginning of solving that problem. And if all we ever ask is what's wrong with someone or with a community, we never get to what's right with the community. And so sometimes, you know, there's a pretty strong stream of racism and classism, paternalism within that approach to neighborhoods. You know, if somebody comes along and wants to help me, and all they do is say, well, what's wrong with Bill now? You know, then, you know, well, I'm not good at math. I'll volunteer. I'm not good at math, you know? And so we'll put you in math classes, and we'll never ask you what's good with you, you know? And, you know, in college, I was a history major, and I took just enough math to graduate as a history major, but I was able to pass my math because I was able to focus on being a history major, you know? And so, so I think that, so what we do is try to see the people and community as a glass half full rather than a glass half empty, and to go asking what's right here rather than what's wrong here. And then we try to attract investment to what's right there and grow it, so the solutions for the neighborhood kind of come from the inside out. And the communities, you know, all of us hopefully are more able to solve our problems today than we were like 16 years old, because somebody came along and focused on what we were good at, invested in what we were good at, and we grew that. And And we've denied that for neighborhoods for a long time. We said we have resources to an under-resourced neighborhood. Now, to get my resources, you need to come to me and you need to have a very bad day. And don't bother showing up. I don't want to know what you're good at. I don't want to know what capacities you have. I just want you to have a bad day. And so a kid that does wrong in my neighborhood is more likely to receive an investment. It's not an investment that young person necessarily wants, but is more likely to receive an investment than somebody does right. And so that's a real problem, when it flips over, it causes a lot of issues in our society, I think. And so our sort of approach is, and it helps to earn trust that way, because all of us would much more trust someone who looks at us for what we have to give to the world than just looked at. I mean, if you ever worked for somebody or around somebody that all they did was look at what's wrong with you, a funny thing starts happening. You actually do more things wrong. You get self-conscious, that voice gets in your head, and it's a real problem, And so by working with communities and focusing on their gifts, skills, and capacities and growing those things, it earns a lot of trust as well.
I think a lot I thought about that investment term that you use, and sometimes when, in a lot of cases, those investments, when it's sanctioned by the government, it's usually comes in a form of lengthy prison terms and adequate education and other ways. When you look at different social programs, you really have to be below Skid Row just to qualify for some of the help, which it's not, which the help is just sometimes, in fact, most of the times, it's just not sufficient for basic human standards.
Yep.
And it's pretty unfortunate.
Yeah, we're more willing as a society to spend money on a young man once he breaks the law, a lot more money, by the way, than it would take to actually help him discover his gifts when he's 10, 11, 12, grow those gifts, pour into him so that he becomes who he's created to be, and actually makes a real contribution to us as a society. And who knows how many things have been lost as a result of all the people that we are paying too much to put into prisons, and some of them private prisons, where there's a whole nother set of issues in that, And so so I think, it's in Metanoia, we oftentimes hire kids on summer internships. We pay them a little stipend, and then oftentimes, it's the most frustrating thing in the world to get a letter from the state that mom or dad's EBT, which is food stamps allotment, is being threatened because this young person just got an internship and it raised the household income, and then they're, and so now they're being, it's like, well, we try to create a safety net, which, we do need those things in society, but they become sort of like traps for folks, and they can't, we as a society can't celebrate when people get beyond them a lot of times.
Thank you.
Can you speak to a little bit of that word asset and what you're seeing? If we're going to talk about some of the challenges, speak to what you're seeing as assets in the community, if you will. And I'd love to speak to that and what you've seen as a result of the work that you're doing.
Yeah, well, we think of an asset, it's the same as, an asset is something on a balance sheet that has value. It can be exchanged for value. If invested in, it can create additional value. And the assets in any community, not just my neighborhood, but any neighborhood, are human and physical, basically. And so there are, young people come into our programs as a result of being recommended for their teachers for showing leadership potential. A lot of our kids are at risk, but by virtue of coming to us on that positive note, parents feel, when we first started, after a year of listening, we decided we were going to start with a after school program, and we went with this asset-based idea. We asked the school, will you recommend kids to us who show leadership potential? Now, all the kids at Shakur are on free and reduced lunch, and so all the kids are struggling. But and then we went around with a clipboard to households before school started with these names that were recommended by their teachers for showing leadership potential. It was very interesting, to go up to doors, knock on these doors, and say, and people see me coming, like, what's this guy coming for? And to say, No, Adam, I'm here because your son such and such. Well, he was recommended by the school for showing leadership potential, and we're starting a leadership program. And it was amazing to see sort of the transformation that would come over parents' face in that moment. Because it was like, I'm living in a neighborhood. By virtue of living here, people think I'm a failure. By virtue of not having as much money, people think I'm a failure. By virtue of even sending my kid to that school, people think I'm a failure because it's a failing school. And finally, somebody somewhere said I might be doing something right. And so like it creates asset, focusing on the strengths of people builds community. It builds a sense, it's helped us parents put in a certain amount of community participation to keep children in our program. It's helped us get a new school built. We led a sort of a petition drive advocacy campaign to get a new school built. It's helped us get a $4 million mitigation agreement from a local rail authority building a facility next to us, that kind of thing, along with some other partners. And so, the assets in the community can be physical, it can be human, but the important thing to recognize is that actually what matters most is the pair of glasses I put on, metaphorical glasses I put on in the morning as I go out and perceive the neighborhood. Because one of the first rehabs is actually the houses across the street from me that we did years ago. That house was abandoned, it was in terrible shape. And so you look at the old school now, gosh, this is a terrible liability, it's got no potential. But like, do you see the potential in the community, or do you just see problems? And it's easy to drive through a neighborhood like mine and see only the problems, because that's what we've been conditioned to see by American society. Right. And we've been conditioned to drive through a much nicer neighborhood and see, oh, this is a very lovely neighborhood because the lawns are manicured. But there are problems there too. You let the people from my community begin to diagnose the problems there, just like oftentimes nonprofit boards are made from people from those communities, and diagnose problems in my neighborhood. We'll find some problems: overconsumption, racism, other things going on in those neighborhoods. We could set up workshops over there and blame those people for not coming to the workshops, just like people do in our neighborhood. And but it's a process, I think, of how do we look at people and communities for their beauty, and that, I think, so in a neighborhood, it sort of starts with the citizens in those neighborhoods are the most important building blocks of community. And then it goes to, Knight and Kretzmann called them citizens associations, which are groups of people that come together that don't get paid to be together. These are churches and block clubs and that kind of things. They're very powerful institutions within American society particularly. And so how do we organize with those folks, get to know them? And then there are the institutions, which are the groups of people that come together that do get paid to be together. And oftentimes in distressed communities, the institutions are driving the agenda, not the citizens anymore. And that's a problem. So how do we let citizens begin to redrive the agenda, and the institutions can be there to support the citizens and their own sort of goals.
Right. And so those organizations then help control the flow of those assets. And
that's right. Okay. And if they're the ones defining where the assets go, and they define them only according to people's problems, then the people are just responding to the economy we create for them. They're saying, well, gosh, the way I see, I don't have any resources, but my neighbor just got some resources for showing something's wrong with them. So I guess I need to have something wrong with me to get these resources, and they don't have anybody, nobody's growing people's capacities. So I think, I think that one of the beauties of the sort of social movement protests we've seen in the past year, well, there's two things going. I think that it's young people sort of saying, all right, you haven't done it for us, so we're going to organize ourselves, and yet if when there are viable institutions and organizations that have been invested in over decades, the reason why white people don't need to take to the streets is they have institutions and organizations that represent them, that have been built up over decades, have been invested in, that can, negotiate all these things and figure them out. But you have to take to the streets when you haven't been invested in, or when the institutions within your community haven't been invested in, so that they have an equal seat at the table with other groups. So
that's right. Lots to digest.
Following up on that, Bill, just real quick, I think that for me, my motivation for joining this project, this interview project comes after the George Floyd protests and so forth, and sort of this understanding that, Black communities are not going to solve racism, right?
Mm-hmm.
White communities are the challenge there. They're the ones who need to change.
Mm-hmm.
Women are not going to solve domestic abuse issues, right?
Mm-hmm.
Men are going to have to step up and change in order to help solve that challenge. And so, I think that's part of my work too, and why I engage with some of this men's work is to help support other men in that process of growth, so that we can individual by individual sort of enlighten the world and try to make it a better, safer place. To that end, I know that you've described how you work individually with a lot of the young people who come through your leadership program and so forth, and I know you have a pretty large staff as well. What do you do to challenge them on their journey besides, I'm just curious if you have a way in which you engage them in a way that allows them to grow, specifically, like what type of techniques do you use for that?
Yeah, I think it's really critical. Like we talk a lot about this at Metanoia, that we can't, you can't change anybody else unless you're not changing yourself. And so we give pretty generous sort of like allotment for all of our full-time staff for things like Con Ed, that kind of thing. But we also take time for our team to look inward, to ask important questions about where they are in life, and to focus on their own journey. We spend a lot of energy, like we talk about first work and second work, which is a distinction that comes from a guy named Parker Palmer, Quaker theologian, educator, that second work is the work you do out in the world. It's like the things people hold you accountable to. The old school renovation is a second work kind of thing, but the first work is what you have to do in order to get to do the second work well. And the first work, oftentimes nobody's going to ask you whether you did that well. I mean, this group probably will. It's the advantage of having a group like this, is you guys will probably ask, okay, how's your first work going? But the first work is really critical. And so how do we build a culture within Metanoia where, like, we take that word very seriously, Metanoia, and we ask each other, like, how have you changed as a result of doing this work? Or how are you changing right now? What are you learning, growing? How are you doing that? And also, like, at most of our like staff meetings begin with 2 minutes of silence. And I'm not naive to think that not everybody has sort of a practice of trying to get to a silent space like I do in the mornings every morning. And so people are probably thinking about their grocery list or whatever they have 2 minutes. But it just sort of says, all the work we have to do, and it's busy, super busy. But like, to make sure that we're carving out space to say, no, this first work stuff is really important, and let's try to take a minute and center ourselves so that we come into the space in a really good way. And so yeah, it is really important for our work. And it's also it's the one like non-negotiable I have certainly had, and thinking about hiring people. If someone comes and they're not able to talk about their own growth journey, or they don't seem open to their own growth, if they're ready to save the world but they haven't ever looked in the mirror, no thank you, please find another place to work. Because I know that inability to look inward and to ask oneself, what do I have to do with this problem, is a real liability if you can't do that eventually. And so for white people, it means like being bicultural. And it means to do our work well, it means, you can grow up white in Charleston, South Carolina, and never have to be bicultural and live a very like successful life. You never have to learn how to cross over. But every person who's Black or brown has to be bicultural if they're gonna have any measure of success in Charleston, South Carolina. And so like, we require the white staff or board members come on our team to say, no, you're gonna have to learn how to accommodate yourself to a different culture and operate in that different culture, and not force that culture to always operate according to your rules, and so.
Thank you for that. I just wanted to chime in with my own personal experience with the Mankind Project, and everything that you said when it comes to personal work. This is definitely the first organization I've ever come across that emphasized personal work. You know,
Mm.
I've been involved with this organization since 2012,
Hmm.
and shortly afterwards, I had all of 2013 was just some heavy emotional crisis going on, but steadily attending these I groups or during that year and getting initiated helped a lot process my own um, wrongdoings and things of that nature. So that helped, and I can see how it can help. Um, as far as crossing cultural barriers, yeah, for the longest time, I've been the only Black bodied man in I groups and the weekend warriors. So there is that bit of uncomfortable uncomfortability. I think that's a word,
Yeah.
but that I have to reckon with, and it's good to know that you emphasize that among your white body employees and staff, and because it's needed. It's needed. Again, trust is needed. Being uncomfortable or being comfortable with your level of uncomfortable uh, stuff, all of that is needed for soul change, and,
Yes.
and it all goes hand in with social change. So
Hmm.
yeah, that's I'm glad to know that there's more work out there being done.
Hmm. Hmm.
I'll say that, leave it at that.
Absolutely.
Do we have
But
do we have time for a quick question?
yeah, absolutely. We have about 8 minutes left, and so
Okay. Okay. So Bill, define soul change
Mm.
for you personally. It might sound like you may have answered that question, but I'm just moved to ask that again.
Yeah,
Just what does that mean for you?
that's a good question. I don't know if I have like a perfect answer for it. I think it has to do something with maybe with sort of living a fully integrated life. Um, we talk about at Metanoia, one of the things we sometimes have referred to, which comes from Richard Rohr as well, as we talked about contemplative activism. And we define contemplative activism as doing the right thing for the right reason. So maybe that's a soul change thing. Like, some people do the wrong thing. Some people do the right thing, but they do it for the wrong reason. It's all ego. It's all about a different agenda. The trick is, can you get yourself fully lined up so that you do the right thing for the right reason? You're not acting out of a space internally that's not settled, intentional, lined up. Um, and so maybe soul change has to do with living that level of clarity. As a person of, from my own faith, soul change has to do with, one way to articulate it would be like, how do I create the right circumstances so that the Spirit of God can flow through me to the world without interruption? And there's lots of things in my life that would like to interrupt it. My own agendas, my own egos, my own traumas, my own issues, my own, name them. They're all over the place. And yet, however you think about that source that I call God, that it's readily available to me, and it's a gift to me every day. And that, like, so how do I live in such a way that that flow is there? And so it's for me, soul change is about the work I think you guys are doing in this group, which is sort of like identifying your own traumas, identifying your own issues, and how often those things come and hijack your daily life, your thought processes, and living in freedom. Maybe soul change is freedom. Like, it's how do you live free enough so that the day's circumstances don't don't run the agenda, that you have, that, you might have difficult circumstances, but that they don't have that ability to sort of like take over your life and name you and make you act in a way that actually isn't authentic to who you are. And so I think also soul change is like, it's not a matter of like, I don't actually subscribe to what a lot of sort of Christian folks would think we're super depraved and we're sort of trying to get into a better place. Well, we are we are sort of depraved. We do make a lot of mistakes, but like deep within us, there is the image of God, or however you want to phrase it, something really beautiful. And that soul change is about just creating the right environment for that to be evident. Whomever meets me, wherever they meet me, and trusting that somehow, if I can do that, that will give life to me and it will give life to others along the way. And that mutual giving of life creates new life in and of itself. That's bigger than just me or them along the way as well.
And it really reduces that idea that we're all separate.
That's right. That's right. Exactly. And maybe that's a big part of that soul change is recognizing the essential oneness in all of us. So even if somebody's mad at me or doesn't like me, that's okay, because there's actually something deeper going on there that I need to listen to, first of all, because they might be pointing out something I can work on. But also that it doesn't mean that that I don't have to let their reaction to me drive my reaction to them, which is one of the most freeing, beautiful things I've ever learned in my life, is that your attitude or reaction to me doesn't have to determine my attitude or reaction about you. And yeah.
It's a choice to take things personal.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, our Buddhist friends sort of say our problems are not really our problems. Our problems are what we think about our problems. That's the real problem.
That's right.
And so like maybe soul change has to do with thinking in the right way and feeling in the right way. I'm sort of cautious about the word thinking, because I feel like we in the West like put too much energy into the top 3 inches of our skull and not into embodying things as much as we should. But it's really about like lining things up so that authentically through and through it comes from the right place.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. Well put.
Thank you for the question.
Thank you, Bill. We're kind of wrapping it up here, and I just want to say, for me, I feel very inspired by your words and your perspective, and I've learned a lot here, and I'm sure that's true for my colleagues as well.
Absolutely.
I guess before we let you go, how can people who may be listening help support your organization?
Well, they could sort of go to our website. My email is bill@pushingforward.org. If they have ideas based on anything, you go to the website, take a look at what you see. If you have ideas about ways to support, we can look at it. We do host volunteers from time to time. We're sort of overhauling the way we work with volunteers these days. And so we're in the middle of pandemics, we're not doing a lot of volunteer work, but we look at that. But you may have other gifts, skills, and abilities that you think can sort of come to bear on the work that we do. We exist because people make contributions to our work as well, and you can make a donation on our website as well, pushingforward.org. And just reach out to us if you find other ways. If you look on our website, find other ways to connect. We're glad to have those conversations. So,
yeah, beautiful.
But I would say, forgive me, Brenton. Like I would say also, like take seriously your own metanoia. Maybe that's something that, whether you connect with metanoia in a real way or in a more substantive way with the organization, be a part of the movement, which means like focusing on using lenses that ask where people's giftedness is rather than their liabilities, focusing on their gifts and the skills and abilities rather than just their problems, and focusing on your own personal journey as well. Important.
That focusing on what's working versus what's not working.
Mm-hmm.
And you're located in North Charleston, South Carolina, just for our
That's
viewers,
right.
so people know where you're based out of. So
yep,
South Carolina.
We're the world headquarters. The world headquarters is in North Charleston.
Wow. Well, we are just about at 10 o'clock, and I just want to say thank you so much, Bill. Thank you so much for your time and your insight, sharing yourself. and connecting with us. So deeply, deeply appreciate it. So.
And thank you to our viewers and those who tuned in to watch this. We're really grateful for you.
Thank you. And the conversation was most inspiring, and appreciate it. And definitely worthy of more time spent on the subject.
Thank you all very much.
Thank you too.
All right.
Right.
Peace.